The whiskey-soaked gambler at the end of the trading post counter jabbed his thumb toward the woman standing near the pickle barrels and said loud enough for half the room to hear that nobody would want damaged goods like that, not even for free. And Sarah Owens felt the familiar burn of shame crawl up her neck as every eye in the establishment turned her way. She kept her gaze fixed on the flour sack in her trembling hands, pretending she had not heard what everyone in Golden, Colorado knew to be the town's favorite bit of gossip. 3 months had passed since she had arrived on the dusty stage with nothing but a carpetbag and a hollow look in her eyes. And 3 months was plenty of time for a town of 200 souls to decide exactly what kind of woman she was. The scar that ran from her left temple down to her jawline told part of her story. The way she flinched at sudden movements told the rest. Her husband back in Missouri had been a brutal man, and when she had finally gathered the courage to run, she had run far. The shopkeeper, a portly man named Graves, cleared his throat uncomfortably and tallied her purchases with quick, nervous movements. Sarah counted out the coins from her small purse, earned from taking in mending and washing for the few families willing to employ a woman with her reputation. A divorced woman was barely better than a prostitute in most people's eyes, and the fact that she had left her husband rather than endured his fists until death did them part made her something worse than either. She gathered her parcels and turned toward the door, keeping her head down as she always did. The April sunshine of 1876 was bright and warm as she stepped onto the wooden sidewalk, and she had almost made it to the street when she heard the voice that would change everything. "Madam, you dropped this." Sarah turned to find a tall cowboy holding out a handkerchief that had slipped from her basket. He was lean and sun-weathered, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of summer grass. But what struck her most was the way he looked at her, directly at her, without the mixture of pity and disdain she had grown accustomed to seeing in the faces of Golden citizens. "Thank you," she managed, reaching for the square of cloth. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she pulled back as if burned. "Samuel Yates," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Just came into town with a cattle drive from Texas. Heard the foreman say we will be staying in the area for a spell while the herd fattens up on mountain grass." Sarah nodded once, uncertain why this stranger was bothering to introduce himself. Men in Golden generally pretended she did not exist, or worse, propositioned her with ugly assumptions about her willingness to provide certain services. "Sarah Owens," she said quietly, then immediately wished she had not. Giving her name felt like offering something valuable to someone who would inevitably throw it back in her face once he learned what she was. But Samuel Yates just smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes and made something long dormant flutter in her chest. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Owens. Or is it Mrs. Owens?" "It is Miss," she said firmly. She had taken back her maiden name the moment she had crossed the state line, claiming her mother's family heritage instead of the name of the man who had broken her ribs and split her face open. "Well then, Miss Owens, would you allow me to carry your parcels? They look heavy, and I have got nothing but time before I am due back at camp." Sarah opened her mouth to refuse, but something in his open, honest expression made her hesitate. When was the last time anyone had offered her kindness without expecting something cruel in return? She could not remember. "That is not necessary," she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. "I know it is not necessary," Samuel replied, his smile widening. "But my mama raised me to be a gentleman, and she would tan my hide even now if she knew I let a lady struggle with heavy bags while I stood by doing nothing." Before Sarah could protest further, he had gently taken the parcels from her arms. "Where are we headed?" She found herself walking beside him down the main street of Golden, acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. The town was nestled in a valley where Clear Creek rushed down from the mountains, surrounded by red rock formations that glowed like fire in the afternoon sun. She had chosen this place because it was far from Missouri and because the mountains made her feel hidden, protected somehow. "I have a room above the seamstress shop," Sarah said, pointing to a narrow building squeezed between the assayer's office and a boarding house. "Just there." They walked in silence for a moment before Samuel spoke again. "This is fine country, different from Texas, but fine all the same. Those mountains look like something out of a painting." "They do," Sarah agreed softly. She loved the mountains, the way they stood solid and unmovable, the way they had been there long before towns and gossip and judgment. When they reached the external staircase that led to her room, Samuel handed back her parcels with the same courteous manner he had shown throughout their brief walk. "Thank you for letting me be of service, Miss Owens. I hope I will see you again before we move the herd north." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, and she nodded once before hurrying up the stairs. Only when she was safely inside her small room did she allow herself to lean against the door and press her hand to her racing heart. She could not remember the last time a man had spoken to her with such simple, uncomplicated respect. It felt dangerous and wonderful all at once. She moved to the window and watched as Samuel Yates walked back down the street, his long stride easy and unhurried. Then she saw him stop near the trading post, where the same gambler who had called her damaged goods was now stumbling out into the street. Sarah could not hear what was said, but she saw Samuel's posture change, saw him step closer to the gambler with clear purpose. The conversation was brief and apparently one-sided, with Samuel doing most of the talking while the gambler grew visibly smaller and more sober. When it was finished, the gambler nodded rapidly and scurried away, and Samuel continued down the street as if nothing had happened. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She could not afford to hope. Hope was a luxury for women who had not already lost everything. For the next 3 days, Sarah tried not to think about Samuel Yates, but he seemed determined to make himself unforgettable. She saw him in town each afternoon, always finding some reason to tip his hat and exchange a few words with her. On the second day, he helped her carry water from the creek when her bucket had sprung a leak. On the third day, he brought her a handful of wildflowers with the casual explanation that he had seen them growing on the hillside and thought they were too pretty to leave there. Other people noticed. Mrs. Henderson, who owned the seamstress shop below Sarah's room, made pointed comments about young women who encouraged cowboys. The minister's wife crossed the street rather than share a sidewalk with Sarah after witnessing Samuel walk her home from the general store. But for the first time since arriving in Golden, Sarah found she did not care quite so much about what people thought. On the fourth day, Samuel appeared at her door in the early evening with a proposition that made her heart race with a mixture of fear and longing. "There is a dance at the Odd Fellows Hall tonight," he said, turning his hat in his hands in a gesture she was coming to recognize as nervousness. "I know it is forward of me, seeing as we have only known each other a few days, but I would be honored if you would accompany me." Sarah stared at him, speechless. A dance. A public dance where the entire town would see them together, where people would talk and judge and make assumptions that would follow her for months. "I cannot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do not understand what you are asking." "I think I do," Samuel said quietly. "I have heard the talk, Sarah. May I call you Sarah?" She nodded mutely, too stunned by his use of her first name to speak. "I have heard what people say about you," he continued. "That you left your husband back east, that you are divorced, that you are not respectable." He paused, and his green eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I have also seen how you carry yourself with dignity despite how this town treats you. I have seen you help old Mrs. Chen carry her laundry even though she never thanks you. I have seen you give your last coin to that beggar boy who sits outside the saloon. And I have seen enough in my 26 years to know that people's gossip usually has nothing to do with who a person really is. You do not know what I have done, Sarah said, feeling tears threaten again. You do not know what I am. Then tell me, Samuel said simply. Tell me your story and let me decide for myself. And so Sarah told him. She invited him into her small room, poured him a cup of weak tea, and told him everything. She told him about marrying Richard Owens at 18, about how charming he had been during their courtship, and how quickly that charm had curdled into cruelty after the wedding. She told him about the beatings that had started small and grown worse, about the night he had thrown her against the fireplace and given her the scar she would carry forever. She told him about how her own family had urged her to stay, to be a better wife, to pray harder and submit more completely. She told him about the night she had packed a bag while Richard was passed out drunk and had run for her life. The law does not look kindly on women who leave their husbands, she said, her voice hollow with remembered pain. I had to go to a judge in Kansas City and tell him everything, show him my scars, beg him to grant me a divorce. Even then, he called me a failure as a woman, said that a good wife could have reformed her husband, but he signed the papers and I became free. She laughed bitterly. Free to be called damaged goods wherever I go, free to be treated like I have a disease that might be catching. Samuel was quiet for a long moment after she finished. Sarah kept her eyes on her hands, folded tightly in her lap, unable to bear seeing the disgust or pity she expected to find in his face. My father was a drunk, Samuel said finally, and Sarah's head jerked up in surprise. He was mean when he drank, which was most of the time. I watched him terrorize my mother for 15 years before she finally died of pneumonia. I always thought it was grief that really killed her, that her body just gave up because her spirit had been beaten down so long. His voice was rough with old pain. I was 17 when she passed. I stood at her grave and made myself two promises. First, that I would never touch liquor. And second, that if I was ever blessed enough to have a wife, I would treat her the way my father should have treated my mother, with respect and kindness and love. He reached across the small table and gently took Sarah's hand. She flinched at first, then forced herself to remain still. His hand was warm and calloused from years of hard work, but his touch was impossibly gentle. You are not damaged goods, Sarah Owens, he said fiercely. You are one of the bravest women I have ever met. It takes courage to stay alive when someone is trying to break you. It takes even more courage to walk away and build a new life. Anyone who cannot see that is a fool. Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks, and she made no move to wipe them away. Why are you being kind to me? Samuel smiled, and it was the saddest, most beautiful expression she had ever seen. Because from the moment I saw you in that trading post, trying so hard to be invisible while the world tried to make you feel small, I knew. I have been praying for years for God to send me a woman I could love and protect and build a life with. When I heard that drunk call you damaged goods, and I saw you standing there with your head high despite everything, I thought to myself, there she is. The answer to every prayer I have ever prayed. Sarah could not speak. The words were too big, too impossible. Men like Samuel Yates did not look at women like her and see answered prayers. They saw problems, complications, damaged goods exactly as the gambler had said. But Samuel was looking at her now with such open honesty that she felt something crack inside her chest, some defensive wall she had built around her heart. I am afraid, she whispered. So am I, Samuel admitted. I am afraid you will say no to the dance. I am afraid I will say the wrong thing and scare you off. I am afraid this feeling I have is too much too soon. He squeezed her hand gently. But I am more afraid of letting fear stop me from taking a chance on something that feels this right. Sarah took a shaking breath and made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. I will go to the dance with you. The smile that broke across Samuel's face was like sunrise. Truly. Truly, Sarah said, and felt herself smile in return, a real smile that felt foreign on her face after so many months of careful blankness. I will call for you at 7 o'clock, Samuel said, standing reluctantly. Wear your prettiest dress, Sarah Owens, because I intend to make sure every person in Golden knows I am the luckiest man alive. After he left, Sarah opened her small trunk and pulled out the one good dress she owned, a blue cotton gown with white trim that she had sewn herself. It was not fancy, but it was pretty and it fit her well. She pressed it carefully and hung it near the window to air, then sat on her narrow bed and tried to calm the wild beating of her heart. She was going to a dance, with a man who looked at her like she was something precious, with a man who knew her worst secrets and called her brave instead of broken. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, exhilarating and terrifying all at once. At precisely 7 o'clock, Samuel knocked on her door. He had cleaned up and changed into fresh clothes, his dark hair still damp from washing. He stared at her when she opened the door, and for a moment Sarah felt self-conscious, wondering if the scar on her face was more visible in the evening light. "You look beautiful," Samuel said, and his voice held such genuine admiration that Sarah felt her doubts quiet. "Thank you," she said softly. "You look very handsome yourself." He offered her his arm, and after only a moment's hesitation, she took it. Together they walked down the stairs and into the warm April evening. The Odd Fellows Hall was only 3 blocks away, and with each step Sarah became more aware of the people who stopped to stare, the whispers that followed in their wake. "Hold your head high," Samuel murmured. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." The hall was already crowded when they arrived, full of townspeople dressed in their best clothes. A small band was playing in the corner, fiddle and guitar and a piano that was only slightly out of tune. The music was lively and loud, and several couples were already dancing. The moment Sarah and Samuel walked through the door, a hush fell over the room like a blanket. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Dancers stumbled to a halt. Every eye turned toward them with expressions ranging from shock to outrage to undisguised hostility. Sarah felt her courage waver, felt the old instinct to run and hide rise up strong. But Samuel's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, warm and steady. "Evening, folks," he said cheerfully, as if he could not feel the weight of their judgment. "Fine night for a dance, is it not?" He led Sarah to the refreshment table and poured her a cup of punch, chatting easily about the weather, and the music, and the decorations someone had strung across the rafters. Gradually, the shocked silence gave way to resumed conversations, though Sarah could feel eyes on her constantly, could hear her name being whispered with various degrees of scandal and disapproval. Mrs. Henderson appeared at her elbow, her face pinched with displeasure. "Miss Owens, I am surprised to see you here." "I invited her," Samuel said smoothly. "Samuel Yates, madam, and you are Mrs. Henderson," the woman said stiffly. "Miss Owens rents a room from me." "Then you must know what a fine seamstress she is," Samuel said warmly. "The work she does is remarkable." Mrs. Henderson sniffed. "There are different standards for different kinds of women, Mr. Yates. I would hate to see a newcomer like yourself become the subject of gossip by associating with the wrong sort." "I appreciate your concern," Samuel said, and his voice had gone cold. "But I am a grown man, perfectly capable of choosing my own company, and I choose to spend my evening with Miss Owens, who is more of a lady than many women I have met who claim that title, Mrs." Henderson's face went red and she turned on her heel and stalked away. Sarah felt simultaneously grateful for Samuel's defense and mortified by the scene. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I should not have come." "You have nothing to apologize for," Samuel said firmly. He set down their punch cups and held out his hand. "Dance with me." "I have not danced in years," Sarah admitted, "and people are staring." "Let them stare," Samuel said. "Let them see that you are not alone anymore, that someone values you exactly as you are." Sarah placed her hand in his and let him lead her onto the dance floor. The band was playing a waltz, and Samuel pulled her into the proper position with easy confidence. He was a good dancer, she realized with surprise, leading her through the steps with a sureness that made it easy to follow even though she was rusty and nervous. "Where did a cowboy learn to waltz?" she asked, trying to focus on the music rather than the stairs. "My mother taught me," Samuel said. "She said that dancing was one of life's great joys, and that I should never deprive my future wife of that joy just because I was too stubborn to learn." His expression softened with memory. "She used to make me practice with her in the kitchen, humming the music since we did not have a piano." "She sounds like she was a wonderful woman," Sarah said. "She was," Samuel agreed. "I think she would have liked you very much." They danced 3 songs together, and with each turn around the floor, Sarah felt some of her fear melt away. She was still aware of the disapproving stares, still heard the sharp whispers, but somehow it mattered less when she was in Samuel's arms, moving to music that made her feel almost young again. When the band took a break, Samuel led her outside to the porch where the air was cooler and sweeter. Other couples stood in small groups, talking and laughing. Most fell silent when Samuel and Sarah appeared, but a few nodded politely. "Thank you for this evening," Sarah said quietly. "I know it is costing you. The other cowboys will have heard by now that you are courting the town scandal. It might affect how people treat you." "I do not care," Samuel said simply. "My reputation is not built on what people in a town I just arrived in think of me. It is built on my own actions, on how I treat people, and whether I can look myself in the mirror at night." He turned to face her fully. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. I am not doing this out of pity or because I think you need rescuing. I am doing this because when I look at you, I see a woman I want to know better. A woman who is strong and kind and beautiful, inside and out. I see someone I could fall in love with if you would let me try." Sarah's breath caught. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Samuel said. "I know you have been through hell and came out the other side still caring about people, still trying to do good in the world. I know you have every reason to be bitter and closed off, but you opened your door to me and trusted me with your story. I know that when you smile, really smile, it makes my heart beat faster. And I know that I have never felt this way about anyone before." "Samuel," Sarah whispered, his name a prayer and a question all at once. "You do not have to say anything right now," Samuel said quickly. "I just wanted you to know where I stand. I am not playing games or passing time. I am courting you with serious intent, Sarah Owens. And I will keep courting you for as long as it takes for you to believe that you deserve to be loved." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of breaking glass came from inside the hall, followed by raised voices. Samuel and several other men rushed back inside, and Sarah followed despite her instinct to stay hidden. A fight had broken out near the refreshment table. The same whiskey-soaked gambler who had called Sarah damaged goods was grappling with a younger cowboy, both of them red-faced and swinging wildly. The crowd had backed away, giving them room to brawl. "That is enough," a booming voice cut through the chaos. The town sheriff, a barrel-chested man named Tucker, pushed through the crowd and grabbed both fighters by their collars, yanking them apart with impressive strength. "What in blazes is going on here?" "He insulted Miss Owens," the younger cowboy said, breathing hard. Sarah recognized him as one of the men from Samuel's cattle drive. Called her a whore and said Yates was a fool for bringing her here. The gambler spat blood, just speaking the truth. "Everyone knows what she is." "That is enough," Sheriff Tucker said sharply. "The lady is a guest here like anyone else, and she will be treated with respect." He looked at the gambler with disgust. "Get on out of here, Marvin. You are drunk again and causing trouble. I see you at another public gathering in this condition. I will lock you up for a week." The gambler, Marvin, stumbled toward the door, casting a venomous look at Sarah as he passed. She felt herself shrink back, old reflexes taking over. But Samuel was there instantly, placing himself between her and Marvin's line of sight. "You should go," Sheriff Tucker said to Sarah, not unkindly. "This dance is ruined now, and it might be best if you make yourself scarce for a bit." Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar shame creep back over her. She had ruined the evening for everyone. She had caused a fight just by existing in a space where people like her were not wanted. But Samuel took her hand firmly in his. "If Miss Owens leaves, I leave with her. And I suspect every man from our cattle drive will do the same, seeing as we make up about a third of the people here tonight." There was a murmur of agreement from a group of cowboys standing near the far wall. Sheriff Tucker sighed, clearly calculating the economics of losing so many paying customers from the local businesses. "Nobody needs to leave," he said finally. "But let us all agree to be civil, shall we? This is supposed to be a pleasant social occasion." The band struck up another tune, determinedly cheerful. A few couples moved back onto the dance floor, and gradually the normal buzz of conversation resumed. But the evening had been spoiled, and Sarah knew it was her fault. "Take me home," she said quietly to Samuel. "Please." He nodded and led her out of the hall, back into the night that seemed darker and less friendly than before. They walked in silence for a while, Sarah's mind churning with self-recrimination and old fears. "I am sorry," she said finally. "I am sorry that man got in a fight because of me. I am sorry your evening was ruined." "My evening was not ruined," Samuel said. "I got to dance with a beautiful woman and make it clear to this entire town that she is under my protection. That seems like a successful evening to me." "Samuel, you cannot protect me from everything," Sarah said, stopping in the middle of the street to face him. "You cannot make people respect me. You cannot erase my past or change what I am." "What you are," Samuel said, his voice intense, "is a survivor. What you are is a woman who deserves respect and kindness and love. And I may not be able to change how everyone treats you, but I can damn sure show them how you ought to be treated." Sarah felt tears threaten again, and she was tired of crying, tired of being weak. "Why do you care so much?" Samuel took both of her hands in his. "I told you earlier, you are the answer to my prayers. Maybe I am the answer to yours too, if you will let me be." And there, in the middle of the dark street with mountains rising black against the stars, Sarah Owens made a choice. She stepped forward and let Samuel Yates fold her into his arms. She let herself be held, let herself feel safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. His heart beat steady against her ear, and his arms were strong but gentle around her. "I am afraid I will disappoint you," she whispered into his chest. "I am afraid you will wake up one day and realize you made a mistake." "I am afraid of that too," Samuel admitted. "Afraid I am not good enough for you. Afraid I will say the wrong thing or fail to protect you when you need me. But being afraid is not a good enough reason to walk away from something this important." He pulled back slightly so he could see her face. "Give me a chance, Sarah. Give us a chance." "Yes," Sarah said, and it felt like jumping off that cliff, terrifying and freeing all at once. "Yes, I will give us a chance." Samuel's smile was brilliant even in the darkness. Then, with infinite slowness and care, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and nothing like the rough, demanding kisses she had known in her marriage. This kiss was a question and a promise, and Sarah felt something broken inside her begin to heal. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to court you properly," he said. "I am going to take you on walks and bring you flowers and make you laugh. And when enough time has passed that you are certain of my intentions and your own heart, I am going to ask you to marry me, just so you know what is coming." Sarah laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. "That is very forward, Mr. Yates." "I am a forward man when I know what I want," Samuel said. "And I want you, Sarah Owens. I want a life with you, a future with you. I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I want to give you the kind of love that heals instead of harms." "That sounds wonderful," Sarah whispered. "Frightening, but wonderful." "Then we will be frightened together," Samuel said, and kissed her again. The next morning, Sarah woke to find a bouquet of wildflowers outside her door. The morning after that, Samuel appeared with a basket of fresh rolls from the bakery and an invitation to go for a walk along Clear Creek. Day after day, he showed up with small gifts and steady presents, courting her with a patience and determination that slowly wore away at her defenses. The town, predictably, had much to say about this development. Mrs. Henderson threatened to evict Sarah from her room but backed down when Samuel pointed out that she was current on her rent and had broken no rules. The minister preached a sermon about the importance of moral standards, staring pointedly at Sarah where she sat in the back pew beside Samuel. The gossips clucked their tongues and predicted disaster, but Samuel never wavered. He walked her to church on Sundays, sat with her during services with his head held high. He brought her to the restaurant for supper and ignored the whispers. He introduced her to the other cowboys from the cattle drive, good men who took their cue from Samuel and treated her with courtesy and respect. Gradually, a few of the townspeople began to soften. Sheriff Tucker tipped his hat to her when they passed on the street. The doctor's wife hired her to sew a christening gown and paid her fairly. A few of the other women, the ones who had also known hard marriages or difficult circumstances, began to nod to her in passing. It was not acceptance, not exactly, but it was less open hostility. And with Samuel beside her, Sarah found she could bear the rest. 3 weeks after the dance, Samuel took her on a picnic up into the foothills where the aspen trees were just beginning to leaf out in brilliant green. They spread a blanket beside a cold mountain stream and ate fried chicken and biscuits while birds sang overhead. "The herd will be moving north in another week," Samuel said, watching the water rush past. "We are taking them up to Wyoming where the grass is good and the winter was not so harsh." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had known this moment was coming but had tried not to think about it. Cowboys moved with the herds. That was their life, their livelihood. Samuel would leave and she would be alone again. "I will write to you," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "If you want me to, Sarah," Samuel said, turning to face her. "I am not telling you this to say goodbye. I am telling you because I need to know if you would consider coming with me." Sarah stared at him. "What, marry me?" Samuel said, taking her hands. "I know it has only been a few weeks, and I know I said I would court you properly for longer, but I cannot stand the thought of leaving you here. Marry me and come north with me. We will find a place to settle, buy some land, start a ranch of our own. I have been saving my wages for years, Sarah. I have enough to make a down payment on a good piece of property, enough to build us a house and start a life together." "Samuel, you cannot," Sarah breathed. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Samuel said firmly. "I know I love you. I know I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making you happy. I know that when I picture my future, you are in it. You are the center of it." His green eyes were intense with emotion. "Marry me, Sarah. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." Sarah's mind was spinning. Marriage. The word brought back memories of pain and fear, of being trapped with a man who had sworn before God to love her and had broken that vow with his fists. But when she looked at Samuel, she did not see Richard Owens. She saw a man who had been nothing but gentle and patient and kind. A man who had defended her honor and courted her openly despite the cost. A man who looked at her like she was something precious. "I am afraid," she admitted. "I was married before and it nearly destroyed me." "I am not him," Samuel said quietly. "I will never be him. I will never raise my hand to you in anger, Sarah. I will never make you feel small or worthless. I will spend every day of our marriage making sure you know how valued and loved you are." He squeezed her hands gently. "I cannot promise that life will be easy. Ranching is hard work and there will be struggles, but I can promise that we will face them together, as partners, as equals, and I can promise that I will love you until the day I die." Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered, saying the words out loud for the first time. "I did not want to, I tried not to, but I do, Samuel, I love you." "Then marry me," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. "Say yes, Sarah, take a chance on us." "Yes," Sarah said, and the word felt like freedom. "Yes, I will marry you." Samuel pulled her into his arms and kissed her with joy and relief. When they finally pulled apart, both laughing and crying at the same time, he produced a simple gold band from his pocket. "It was my mother's," he said. "The only thing of hers I kept when my father sold everything for drinking money. I have been carrying it for years, waiting for the right woman to give it to." He slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. She stared at it through tears, this symbol of promise and hope and new beginnings. "We will need to talk to the minister," Samuel said practically, though his eyes were still shining with emotion. "I want to do this properly, with vows before God and witnesses. I want everyone to know that you are my wife, that you are under my protection and care." "When?" Sarah asked. "Tomorrow, if possible," Samuel said. "Or the day after. We leave for Wyoming in 5 days, and I want you to travel as Mrs. Sarah Yates, not as Miss Owens, who people might question, or Miss Street." The next day, they went together to speak with Reverend Matthews. The minister was a stern man in his 50s who had made his disapproval of Sarah quite clear in his sermons. He listened to their request with a frown deepening on his weathered face. "Mr. Yates, I must counsel you to reconsider," he said bluntly. "Miss Owens is a divorced woman. Taking her as your wife will tie you to her past, to her scandal. You seem like a decent young man. Surely you could find a more suitable bride." "There is no one more suitable," Samuel said firmly. "Sarah is the woman I love and the woman I intend to marry. I came to you out of respect for proper channels, but make no mistake, Reverend. I will marry her with or without your blessing. I would prefer to have a church wedding with all things done properly, but if you refuse, we will find a justice of the peace who will perform the ceremony." Reverend Matthews looked taken aback by Samuel's determination. He turned his gaze to Sarah. "Young woman, are you certain this is what you want? Marriage is a sacred bond, not something to be entered into lightly. You have already failed at it once." The word stung, but Sarah kept her voice steady. "I did not fail, Reverend, I survived. There is a difference. And yes, I am certain. Samuel is a good man and I love him. I want to be his wife." The minister sighed heavily. "Very well. I will perform the ceremony, though I maintain my reservations. Come to the church tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. Bring 2 witnesses." They left the minister's office hand in hand, and Samuel immediately went to find 2 of his fellow cowboys to serve as witnesses. Sarah returned to her room and looked through her meager wardrobe, trying to decide what to wear for her wedding. She had no white dress, no fancy gown. In the end, she chose her blue dress with the white trim, the same one she had worn to the dance. It seemed fitting somehow to wear the dress she had been wearing when Samuel had first told her she was the answer to his prayers. That evening, Sarah packed her few belongings into her carpet bag. There was not much to pack. A few dresses, some undergarments, her sewing supplies, a worn Bible that had been her grandmother's. Her entire life fit into one small bag, and there was something both sad and liberating about that. Mrs. Henderson appeared at her door as she was folding her last dress. "I hear you are marrying that cowboy." "I am," Sarah said, bracing herself for disapproval, but Mrs. Henderson surprised her. "I hope he treats you well. I hope you find happiness." She paused, then added grudgingly, "You have been a good tenant, quiet and respectful." "I am sorry if I was not as welcoming as I could have been." It was not quite an apology, but it was more than Sarah had expected. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. That is kind of you to say." The older woman nodded stiffly and left. Sarah finished her packing and tried to sleep, but excitement and nervousness kept her awake long into the night. Tomorrow she would marry Samuel Yates. Tomorrow she would become a wife again, with all the vulnerability and risk that entailed. But this time felt different. This time felt like choosing hope instead of surrendering to fear. The next afternoon, Sarah walked to the church with her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Samuel was waiting outside, dressed in his best clothes with his hair neatly combed. 2 cowboys stood beside him, grinning broadly. "You look beautiful," Samuel said, taking her hand. "You look quite handsome yourself," Sarah replied, and felt some of her nervousness ease at his warm smile. Inside the church, Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony with minimal warmth but proper solemnity. Sarah repeated the vows with a sense of unreality, promising to love and honor Samuel until death parted them. But when Samuel slipped his mother's ring more firmly onto her finger and promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life, the emotion in his voice was so genuine that Sarah felt her doubts quiet. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Matthews said. "You may kiss your bride." Samuel kissed her gently, sweetly, and the 2 cowboy witnesses whooped and hollered with joy. Then they were signing the marriage certificate, making everything legal and official. Sarah Owens was now Sarah Yates, wife of Samuel Yates, and the thought made her feel dizzy with possibility. Samuel had arranged for them to spend their wedding night at the hotel, the only real luxury Golden had to offer. It was a simple room but clean, with a real bed and curtains on the windows. He carried her across the threshold, making her laugh at the old tradition. "Hungry?" he asked, setting her down gently. "I arranged for supper to be brought up." They ate roast beef and potatoes while watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and red. Then Samuel took her hand and led her to the bed, his expression suddenly nervous. "Sarah, I want you to know that we do not have to. That is, if you need time, I understand. I know your first marriage was not good, and I do not want to rush you or make you uncomfortable." Sarah felt a rush of affection for this man who was so careful of her feelings. "Samuel, I am your wife now, and I trust you. I want this." "If at any point you need me to stop," Samuel said seriously, "you just say so. Your comfort and happiness matter more to me than anything else." He kissed her then, slowly and thoroughly, giving her time to relax into the embrace. His hands were gentle as he helped her out of her dress, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, It was with tenderness and care that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. This was what marriage was supposed to be, she realized. Partnership and respect and mutual joy. This was what she had been denied in her first marriage and what Samuel was giving her now. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Samuel held her close while she cried quiet tears of relief and healing. "Did I hurt you?" he asked anxiously. "No," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "These are happy tears. I just never knew it could be like that, gentle and good. I thought there was something wrong with me because I hated it before. But it was not me, it was him." "It was definitely him," Samuel said fiercely. "And you never have to be afraid again, Sarah, not with me." She believed him. Against all odds and past experience, she believed him. They left Golden 3 days later as part of the cattle drive heading north to Wyoming. Sarah rode beside Samuel on a gentle mare he had purchased for her, wearing a split-riding skirt she had sewn herself. The other cowboys treated her with respect and courtesy, and if they found it odd that their friend had married so quickly, they kept their thoughts to themselves. The journey north took 2 weeks of long days and cold nights camping under the stars. Sarah had never traveled like this before, had never slept on the ground or cooked over an open fire. But Samuel was patient, teaching her what she needed to know and making sure she was comfortable. The other men helped too, showing her tricks for staying warm and dry, sharing their supplies when hers ran low. At night, Samuel would spread their bedroll away from the others, giving them privacy. They would lie together looking up at the vast expanse of stars, talking about their hopes and dreams for the future. "I want land near the mountains," Samuel told her one night. "Good grass for cattle, fresh water from snowmelt. Maybe a valley where we will be protected from the worst of the winter storms." "I want a garden," Sarah said, "vegetables and flowers, a place that is ours where I can put down roots and never have to run again." "You will have it," Samuel promised, "all of it and more." "I am going to build you the finest house I can manage, Sarah. Nothing fancy but solid and warm. A place where we can raise our children." "Children," Sarah repeated softly. She had not thought about children in years, had assumed that part of life was closed to her. "You want children?" "A whole houseful if you are willing," Samuel said with a grin. "But only if you want them too. I know childbirth is dangerous and I would never pressure you." "I want them," Sarah admitted. "I used to dream about having babies back before my marriage turned sour. I would like to have that dream again." Samuel pulled her closer. "Then we will have babies, as many as God sees fit to bless us with, and we will raise them with love and kindness, teach them to be good people who treat others with respect." They reached Wyoming in early May when the prairie was green and lush with spring growth. The cattle drive ended at a railhead town where the herd would be loaded onto trains bound for eastern markets. Samuel collected his wages, a substantial sum earned over many months of hard work. "Time to find our land," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. They spent a week riding through the countryside, looking at properties for sale. Samuel wanted to be thorough, to find exactly the right place. They rode through valleys and over hills, past rushing streams and stands of pine forest. Sarah fell in love with the vastness of it all, the way the land seemed to stretch on forever beneath the endless sky. Finally, they found it. A valley nestled in the foothills with a creek running through it and good grass for grazing. Mountains rose to the west, their peaks still white with snow. The land belonged to a widow who was moving east to live with her daughter, and she was willing to sell at a fair price. Samuel walked the property with Sarah, pointing out where he would build the house and barn, where they would plant the garden, where the best grazing was. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Sarah found herself caught up in the vision of what this place could become. "What do you think?" Samuel asked, watching her face carefully. "Can you see us building a life here?" Sarah looked around at the green valley, the clear water, the protective mountains. She imagined a house with windows that let in light, a garden full of vegetables and flowers, children playing in the grass. She imagined growing old here with Samuel, building something lasting and good. "Yes," she said, smiling at him. "I can see it all." They bought the land that very day, signing papers that made them property owners. Samuel paid the widow in cash, counting out bills with careful precision. When it was done, when the deed was signed and recorded, he picked Sarah up and spun her around with joy. "We did it," he said, laughing. "We have our own land, Sarah, our own home." The first few months were grueling work. They lived in a tent while Samuel built a small cabin, working from dawn until dark to get walls and a roof up before winter. Sarah helped where she could, holding boards steady while he nailed them, mixing mud for chinking the gaps between logs. She also planted a late garden, coaxing vegetables from the rich soil. Other homesteaders in the area heard about the newlyweds and came to help. It was the way of the frontier, neighbors helping neighbors, because everyone understood how hard it was to start from nothing. Men came to help raise the walls and build the roof. Women brought food and shared seeds for planting. A community formed around them, good people who judged them by their work and character rather than by Sarah's past. By September, they had a snug cabin with a stone fireplace, a barn for the horses and the handful of cattle Samuel had purchased, and a root cellar full of vegetables from Sarah's garden. It was not fancy, but it was theirs, and Sarah had never been so proud of anything in her life. One evening in early October, as they sat by the fire after supper, Sarah shared the news she had been holding close for a week. "Samuel, I think I am with child." He went very still, then turned to look at her with wonder in his eyes. "Truly." "Truly," Sarah said, placing his hand on her still flat belly. "The midwife in town confirmed it. She says the baby should come in late spring." Samuel's face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. He dropped to his knees in front of her chair and pressed his face against her stomach, his shoulders shaking with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me this gift, for giving us this gift." Sarah ran her fingers through his hair, her own eyes damp. "We made this baby together, out of love. That is a miracle I never thought I would have." That winter was harsh, with snow piling up to the windowsills and temperatures dropping well below freezing. But inside their cabin, Sarah and Samuel were warm and safe. They spent the long evenings planning for the baby, arguing good-naturedly over names and making tiny clothes from scraps of fabric. Samuel was attentive to Sarah's every need, bringing her extra blankets when she was cold, rubbing her feet when they ached, reading to her from the newspaper when she was bored. He treated her pregnancy as the precious miracle it was, and Sarah bloomed under his care. In April, when the snow was melting and the first wildflowers were pushing through the mud, Sarah's labor began. The midwife came and stayed, helping Sarah through the long hours of pain and effort. Samuel held her hand and wiped her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement and love. Finally, on a bright morning with birds singing outside the window, their son was born. He came into the world red-faced and squalling, perfect in every way. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the baby in Sarah's arms. "A fine, healthy boy." Samuel stared at his son with tears running down his face. "He is perfect. Sarah, he is perfect." They named him James Samuel Yates, after Samuel's father's father, who had been, by all accounts, a good and decent man. Little James had his father's green eyes and a shock of dark hair, and from the moment he was born, Samuel was completely smitten. The years that followed were full of hard work and deep contentment. They expanded their herd, built a bigger house, and watched their family grow. 2 years after James came Emma, a daughter with Sarah's dark eyes and sunny disposition. 3 years after that came Thomas, another son who was adventurous and fearless from the moment he could crawl. Sarah's life became full in ways she had never imagined possible. She tended her large garden, preserved food for winter, sewed clothes for the children, and helped Samuel with the endless work of running a ranch. It was exhausting, but it was good work, meaningful work. And at the end of every day, no matter how tired he was, Samuel would hold her and tell her he loved her. The children grew up strong and happy, knowing nothing but love and security. Samuel was the kind of father every child deserved, patient and playful and fiercely protective. He taught James and Thomas to ride and rope, instilled in them a respect for hard work and honest dealing. He taught Emma that girls could do anything boys could do, and that she should never let anyone make her feel small. Sarah watched her husband with their children and felt her heart expand with gratitude. This was the life she had dreamed of in the darkest moments of her first marriage, when she had dared to imagine a different future. This was the happiness she had thought was forever beyond her reach. Over the years, their ranch prospered. They added more land, more cattle, built a barn that was the envy of the county. Samuel's reputation as an honest rancher and skilled cattleman spread, and people came from miles around to buy breeding stock from him. Sarah became known in the community as well, not as the scandalous divorced woman, but as Mrs. Yates, a fine woman who was generous with her time and skills. She sewed for people who could not afford store-bought clothes, helped deliver babies when the midwife was unavailable, and always had a meal ready for travelers who stopped by their remote ranch. She never forgot what it felt like to be judged and found wanting, and that memory made her compassionate toward others who struggled. She welcomed the unwed mother when the rest of the community shunned her. She hired the drunk son when no one else would give him a chance. She showed kindness to everyone who crossed her path, because she knew how much kindness had meant when Samuel had offered it to her in a trading post in Golden, Colorado. 20 years after that first meeting, Sarah stood in the same valley where they had built their life together, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. She was 42 years old now, with silver threads in her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of sun and laughter. Her 3 children were nearly grown, James preparing to take over more of the ranch operations, Emma talking about going east to study teaching, Thomas still in school but showing signs of wanting to strike out on his own. Samuel came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He was 48 now, his dark hair mostly gray but still strong and vital. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, resting his chin on top of her head. "About how far we have come," Sarah said softly. "About that day in Golden when you carried my parcels and looked at me like I was someone worth knowing." "You were worth knowing," Samuel said. "You are worth knowing. Best decision I ever made was walking up to you and offering to help." "Best decision I ever made was saying yes," Sarah replied. She turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Samuel Yates. Every single day for 20 years I have loved you more." "I love you too, Sarah Yates," Samuel said, and kissed her the way he had been kissing her for 2 decades, with tenderness and passion and deep affection. They stood there in the fading light, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that mattered. Sarah thought about the young woman she had been, scared and scarred and certain she was damaged beyond repair. She thought about how close she had come to giving up, to believing the cruel things people said about her. And she thought about Samuel, who had seen past the scar and the scandal to the woman underneath, who had called her the answer to his prayers when everyone else called her damaged goods, who had loved her with patience and constancy until she learned to love herself again. "Thank you," she whispered into his chest. "Thank you for saving me." "You saved yourself," Samuel said firmly. "You were brave enough to leave a bad situation, strong enough to survive on your own, courageous enough to risk loving again. I just gave you a safe place to heal." "We saved each other," Sarah decided. "You saved me from loneliness and fear. I saved you from a life without love and family." "That sounds about right," Samuel agreed, and smiled down at her with all the love of 20 years shining in his green eyes. Their oldest son, James, married a nice girl from town the next year, and Sarah became a grandmother at 43 when James and his wife had a baby girl they named Sarah in her honor. Watching Samuel hold his granddaughter, seeing the gentle way he cradled the tiny infant, Sarah was reminded again of how lucky she was. Emma did go east to study teaching and came back 3 years later with a husband, a kind man who respected her intelligence and supported her dreams. They settled in the nearby town, where Emma took a position at the school, teaching the children of ranchers and shopkeepers with dedication and skill. Thomas, their youngest and wildest child, announced at 18 that he wanted to join a cattle drive to Montana. Sarah's heart clenched with fear, remembering her own journey north all those years ago. But Samuel just laughed and said the boy had adventure in his blood, and they should not try to hold him back. "Let him go," Samuel said, holding Sarah close as they watched Thomas ride away. "He will come back when he is ready. The land calls to him the same way it called to me." Thomas did come back, 3 years later, with stories of mountains and prairies, and narrow escapes from bad weather and worse men. He had grown into a man in those years, tall and confident and ready to settle down. He bought land adjacent to their ranch and started his own small operation, and Sarah was grateful to have him close again. The years continued to pass, marked by births and deaths, good harvests and hard winters, joy and sorrow in equal measure. Sarah's hair went completely gray, and her hands became gnarled with arthritis from years of hard work. Samuel developed a limp from an old injury that bothered him in cold weather, and he moved a bit slower than he once had. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper and richer with time, like good soil that improves with cultivation. They knew each other's thoughts before words were spoken, moved in harmony born of decades together, found comfort in simply being near each other. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to celebrate, filling the house and yard with laughter and music. Sarah looked around at all these people, at the life she and Samuel had built, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Speech," someone called out, and soon everyone was chanting for Samuel to say a few words. He stood reluctantly, never comfortable being the center of attention, and pulled Sarah up beside him. "I am not much for speeches," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "But I want to say this. 30 years ago, I met a woman in a trading post in Colorado. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and also the saddest. The world had been cruel to her, and she had every reason to be bitter and closed off." He looked down at Sarah, his eyes shining with emotion. But she was not bitter. She was brave and kind and strong. She took a chance on a cowboy who had nothing but faith and determination to offer, and she made me the happiest man alive. Every day with you, Sarah, has been a gift. Every moment has been precious. You are still the answer to every prayer I have ever prayed." Sarah felt tears stream down her face as their children and grandchildren and friends applauded. She stood on her toes and kissed her husband, not caring that everyone was watching. "You are my answered prayer too," she whispered against his lips. My miracle, my home. They danced that night under the stars, moving slowly to music played by their son James on the fiddle he had learned from a neighbor. Sarah rested her head on Samuel's shoulder and thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about pain and healing, about fear and courage, about judgment and grace. Most of all, she thought about love. The kind of love that sees past scars to the person underneath. The kind of love that chooses someone every single day in 1,000 small acts of kindness and patience. The kind of love that builds a life worth living. What are you thinking about? Samuel asked, echoing the question he had asked her countless times over the decades. Everything, Sarah said simply. Our whole life together, how grateful I am, how blessed I feel. I am the blessed one, Samuel said. Never doubt that, Sarah. They stayed at the party until late, surrounded by the family and community they had built. And when everyone had finally gone home and the house was quiet, Samuel and Sarah climbed the stairs to their bedroom, still holding hands the way they had been holding hands for 30 years. The years continued their steady march forward. Samuel was 70 when he fell ill with a fever that would not break. Sarah sat by his bedside for 3 days and nights, sponging his forehead with cool water and praying harder than she had ever prayed. Their children came home, gathering around their father's bed with worried faces. But Samuel was strong, and he fought his way back from the edge of death. When his fever finally broke and he opened his eyes to find Sarah's tear-stained face hovering over him, he smiled weakly. Not ready to leave you yet, he whispered. Still have more years to love you. Good, Sarah said fiercely, because I am not ready to let you go. He recovered slowly, and though he never regained all of his old strength, he was content to leave the heavy ranch work to James and Thomas while he focused on Sarah and the small pleasures of their life together. They spent long afternoons sitting on the porch, watching the seasons change and the grandchildren play in the yard. They read together, took short walks when the weather was good, and talked about everything and nothing. Sarah was 74 when she woke one morning to find it difficult to breathe. Samuel helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her, but they both knew what this meant. She had been getting weaker for months, her heart giving out after decades of faithful service. Get the children, she said, and Samuel sent their grandson riding to fetch James and Emma and Thomas. By the time they arrived, Sarah was in bed with Samuel sitting beside her, holding her hand. Their children gathered around, faces etched with grief, and Sarah looked at each of them in turn. You have been the greatest joy of my life, she told them. You and your father, you made everything worthwhile. Do not talk like that, Mama, Emma said, crying. You are going to be fine. But Sarah knew better. She could feel her body shutting down, feel the life draining out of her. It did not frighten her. She had lived a long, full life, had known more happiness than she had ever dreamed possible. She looked at Samuel, her hand still clasped in his. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for seeing me when I felt invisible, for loving me when I felt unlovable, for giving me this beautiful life. Sarah, Samuel said, and his voice broke, please do not leave me. I do not know how to be without you. You will be fine, Sarah said, though tears were rolling down her own cheeks. You are strong, and you will not be alone. You have our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. You have so many people who love you. But none of them are you, Samuel said. You are my heart, Sarah, my whole heart. And you are mine, Sarah said. In this life and the next, I will wait for you, Samuel Yates. However long it takes, I will wait for you. She closed her eyes then, feeling peaceful despite the pain in her chest. She thought about that day in Golden, Colorado, more than 50 years ago. She thought about a young cowboy who had carried her parcels and called her beautiful. She thought about falling in love, about building a home, about raising children and growing old beside the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "I love you," she whispered, and those were her last words. Samuel held her as she slipped away, his tears falling on her gray hair. Their children wept, holding each other and their father as they said goodbye to the woman who had been the center of their world. They buried Sarah on a hillside overlooking the valley where she and Samuel had built their life. Samuel stood at her grave long after everyone else had left, talking to her the way he had talked to her every day for more than 50 years. "You were right," he said quietly. "I am not alone. Our children are taking good care of me. But I miss you, Sarah. I miss you every moment." He visited her grave every day, rain or shine, sitting on a bench James had built there and telling her about the ranch, the children, the way the seasons were changing. He lived for 2 more years, long enough to see his first great-great-grandchild born, long enough to know that the life he and Sarah had built would continue long after they were both gone. When Samuel Yates died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 80, his children buried him next to Sarah, just as he had requested. They placed a single stone marker over both graves, with words carved deep into the granite: Sarah Owens Yates and Samuel Yates. She was called Damaged Goods. He called her the answer to his prayers. Together they built a love that lasted forever. And in the valley below, on the land they had claimed and tamed and loved, their descendants continued the work they had begun. The ranch prospered for generations, and the story of Sarah and Samuel became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren who needed to know that love could triumph over pain, that kindness could heal old wounds, that 2 broken people could build something beautiful together. The mountains stood watch over it all, unchanging and eternal, just as they had stood watch over a young woman and a cowboy who had found each other in a dusty trading post in Colorado and changed each other's lives forever. The creek still ran cold and clear through the valley. The grass still grew green in summer and golden in fall. And somewhere in the wind that sighed through the pine trees, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the echo of 2 voices, still talking, still laughing, still in love after all these years. Their great-great-granddaughter, a girl named Sarah after her famous ancestor, would sometimes ride up to that hillside grave and sit on the weathered bench. She would touch the stone marker and think about the woman she had been named for, the woman who had survived and thrived and loved despite everything the world had thrown at her. And she would feel strength flowing into her own bones, courage filling her own heart, knowing that she came from people who had refused to give up, who had chosen love over fear, who had built something lasting and good. The story of Sarah and Samuel became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of seeing people truly, of looking past society's judgments to the person underneath. It became proof that damaged was not the same as destroyed, that scars could heal, that love really could conquer fear. In the small town that had grown up near their ranch, there was a community center named in their honor, the Yates Center, where people gathered for weddings and celebrations and town meetings. Inside, hanging on the wall, was a photograph taken on their 30th anniversary, showing Sarah and Samuel standing together, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling at the camera with joy that transcended the old, fading image. Below the photograph was a plaque with their story, telling future generations about the cowboy who had refused to let the woman he loved be called damaged goods, about the love that had built a dynasty, a community, a legacy that would outlast them both. And on summer evenings, when the light was just right and the wind whispered through the valley, you could almost believe that they were still there, Sarah and Samuel, walking hand in hand through the life they had built together. Still in love, still grateful, still the answer to each other's prayers, just as they had been from the very beginning and would be for all eternity. Their love story had started with a simple act of kindness in a trading post, with a man who saw a woman's worth when no one else would. It had grown through patience and determination, through hard times and good, through sickness and health, through joy and sorrow. And it had ended the way all great love stories should end, not with death but with a promise that transcended mortality, a love so deep and true that not even the grave could diminish it. The damaged goods had become a beloved wife, a devoted mother, a cherished grandmother. The cowboy had become a respected rancher, a pillar of the community, a man whose integrity and kindness were spoken of with reverence. But more than any of that, they had become partners in the truest sense of the word, two halves of one whole, two souls who had found each other against all odds and refused to ever let go. And in that valley in Wyoming, surrounded by mountains and grass and endless sky, their love lived on, a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever been called broken or damaged or unworthy. A reminder that healing was possible, that love was real, that second chances were not just fairy tales but could be the beginning of the most beautiful chapter of all. The sun set over the valley every night, painting the sky in shades of gold and red and purple, just as it had for decades. And somewhere in that eternal cycle of darkness and light, Sarah and Samuel's story continued, passed down through generations, inspiring people to look past surfaces to see the truth underneath, to offer kindness to strangers, to believe in the transformative power of love. They had built more than a ranch in that valley. They had built a legacy of compassion, a testament to human resilience, a love story for the ages. And though their bodies rested on that hillside, their spirits lived on in every descendant who carried their names, their values, their unshakable faith in the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds, the answer to his prayers. That was what Samuel had called Sarah from the very beginning. And in the end, that was exactly what she had been, just as he had been the answer to hers. Two prayers answered in a dusty trading post in Colorado, two lives forever changed by a moment of connection, two souls finding their way home to each other. And that, more than anything else, was what made their story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the generations. Because in a world that could be harsh and judgmental and cruel, Sarah and Samuel had chosen differently. They had chosen to see the best in each other. They had chosen to build rather than destroy. They had chosen love every single day until love became not just what they did but who they were. Their story was complete now, the circle closed, the journey ended. But the impact of their love continued to ripple outward, touching lives they would never know, inspiring hearts they would never meet, proving over and over again that one act of kindness, one moment of truly seeing another person, could change everything. The cowboy and the woman called damaged goods. They had written their story together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. And in the end, they had created something beautiful and lasting and true, a love that had weathered every storm, a partnership that had built an empire, a bond that not even death could sever. And somewhere in that Wyoming valley where the grass still grew green and the mountains still stood tall and the creek still ran clear and cold, their love remained, eternal, unbreakable, perfect. The answer to prayers whispered in the darkness, the reward for courage in the face of fear, the happy ending that both of them had earned through years of choosing each other, every single day, until the end of their days and beyond.